welcome back to this episode When Push Comes to Shove. Today we are delighted to have Chilled Mama Cathy here, who is a doula and a perinatal practitioner. So hi Cathy, welcome. And if you
Hi, Carly.
start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey and what you're up to.
Hi, Carly. Thank you very much for having me on When Push Comes to Shove. I feel such a great podcast, so many interesting people you've had on and topics that you've covered. I'm a mum of 5 children, so my eldest is 5 and my youngest is 10. So I have been supporting pregnant women and families and postnatally for a few decades now. And my sort of interest came from deciding to have really wanting a home birth of my first and being put off it, having a home birth of my second and joining home birth support group. This is back in 1997, and then moving house and setting up one locally. So I live near Luton in Bedfordshire, just off the M1. If you know Toddington service station, we're just up the hill in the village of Toddington. And I did lots of volunteering with the NCT, various different roles, and attended conferences, and so really sparked my passion to support families at this time and to make information more accessible. And one of the first things I did, because we were talking before, there's an awful lot of knowledge out there that other people are holding on to, and they're just telling us, just do this. And if we ask questions about it, then we're seen as being awkward. But these are our children. We are parents. We're going to be caring for our children and making decisions for them. And this needs to be empowered from the start. I found I'm a feminist, and I was doing campaigning and marches, and then became pregnant and found that I have never been so patronised in my life. I was called good girl, and suddenly all the things that I had fought for just seemed to be disappearing, and it was almost as if, to me, it felt like that it was antenatal care was almost promised like a talisman. If you're a good girl and attend all your appointments, and yeah, does that ring a bell? Attend all your appointments, do what you're told, we will reward you with a healthy baby. And they use this word, healthy baby. And I'm a big believer that you can't have a healthy baby without a healthy mum, parent. And it was almost as if any questioning of it was therefore you were not being a good mother, and you ran the risk of not getting this reward at the end. And even things that seemed really small, you couldn't question anything. And I had when I was first pregnant, I lived in Portsmouth, and there they only did the 12-week scan. They didn't do the 20-week scan. Then I moved. By the time I had number 2, I was living nearer Winchester, and there they only did the 20-week scan and not the 12-week scan. And after that, recommendations changed, and now everywhere offers both. But it made me think, what was why was there this difference? Yes, why are they different? And if one was so important, why weren't they offering that one? You know, why? How could 2 places offer different scans,
but still say they're just as important and you have to go to them?
Yes. And things like your blood tests or being weighed, and all these things, I started to question how relevant. What difference would it make to me? What difference would it make to my pregnancy, my birth? What would I do with the information? Because we think these things like going to a scan or something is all, we see it from our point of view. Oh, it'd be nice to bond with the baby or to hear the baby, get reassurance. We don't think about what the point of the scan is from the medical profession. And the medical profession have quite clear things that they want from these appointments. But if they're not shared, you don't realise that. You then go to these appointments thinking it's just going to be reassuring. and then later find out, oh, actually, it's not reassuring. There's this and this, you know, questioning the dates that you're given, telling your midwife is
mine. That is a bugbear of mine. Estimated due dates.
Yeah, having almost a stand-up row with the midwife was my third. And by then I was learning all sorts of things. So I didn't go to a doctor. I found you didn't have to go to a doctor. You could go straight to your midwife. I had to decide I didn't want scans. So I was really upset how much my little ones, particularly my first, how much she had jumped in the womb with the scan. And we don't think about that it is sound energy, and we might not hear it. But often babies react quite vigorously to scans, and not less, they try and move away, even in pregnancy with the Doppler, and midwives will say, oh, they're moving away, if I can't find them, every time I move it the baby's moved away, and maybe there's a reason. Anyway, so I'd left it late. I was 17 weeks before I contacted a midwife, and she came and did the booking, and she said, oh, Jess, she got out her wheel to work out the due date. And I said, oh, you don't need to do that, because I've gone through the calendar. I've marked all the weeks off. I know exactly how far, you know, I've counted the 40 weeks, because the wheel is just an way to approximate. And it can be out, can't it? It's not calibrated. And she said, oh, no, I'll do it my way. And I went, but your way is only an approximation to get to my way. And it was like, not understanding, she was not understanding the reasons behind what she was doing. And so really that's where I started being awkward. And I had supported, you know, heard lots of birth stories, supported lots of people, and I was hearing all these stories where they were not being listened to, or not being shared the information, that they didn't know what some of these tests and things were for. They were just going through the motions.
We very much feel like we have to, don't we? That's what we're told to do, so that's what we do. And there's no question.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think there's missing a trick, because we then, as a society, we then expect people to go home with their babies and care for their babies, but we haven't let them have any agency or given them any power to take care of their babies while they've been pregnant, and particularly dads and partners, because they are just totally excluded. And then we complain that parents are always taking their children to the doctors. And you go, well, if you've told them for the last 9 odd months not to trust themselves, not to listen to, you know.
It's so true.
Yes, and then I set up pregnancy relaxation classes, mostly because people said to me I'd had 2 straightforward births, and I hadn't even used gas and air. That wasn't the plan with number one. Number one, I planned to use gas and air. And so people were saying, we need to know what you do. By then I was also with AIMS as well, and just reading all I could, watching the birth stories on the telly, and actually, can I tell you one story from one of these birth, because I really think all women need to see this. Need to hear about this story, because we spend a lot of time hearing about what we should do in giving birth, and there's lots talked about, you know, it needs to be safe for the baby, and we forget that the mother needs to feel safe, the pregnant person needs to feel safe, and that it was a birth program on a cable channel, and it was called Babes in the Wood, and it was a birth centre in the New Forest. It was filmed by Bernadette Boss, and it followed women giving birth at the birth centre. And this one woman, it was her second baby, she'd turned up at the birth centre, she'd only been there 20 minutes, and she was already bearing down, already pushing. Now, she'd had her first baby in hospital, and this baby, she was in the pool, but she'd obviously not necessarily used a birth pool before. Nobody had talked to her about positions. So, and it was the shape of a bath, just a very big bath. It wasn't like a modern one, because this is a few years ago now. So she was lying in it as if she was in the bath. But of course, a bath, your shoulders stop going down. So she was at her hands like that, holding onto the bath to stop herself going under the water. So already she's got strain. And the midwife was shining a torch up her bottom and telling and encouraging her to push, and wasn't looking at what the woman was doing and wasn't looking at the face. And she was holding on to this and going, and then the midwives, as you know, that when you're pushing, they're listening to the baby after every push, because babies, a lot of people don't realize that babies' heart rates do go down normally during a contraction. That's very normal. It's that the heart rate needs to come back up after the contraction. And it can show that baby's not doing very well if it takes a while for the baby's heart rate to come back after. So the midwife was listening in and going, oh, I'm getting worried about this heart rate. I think you need to push more. And I'm thinking, she's only been there 20 minutes. This isn't somebody you need to rush. But the woman was like, okay, going purple in the face. Now, you're a doula, Carly. You've been at births. I've seen what happens when to the baby's heart rate as soon as somebody is told to hold their breath and push. It just plummets. And the midwife was not looking at the woman's face. She was only looking at her bottom. And fortunately, another midwife came in, because the midwife started saying, oh, I think we're going to have to take you out. We're going to have to transfer you. And this poor woman was obviously getting really scared. Unfortunately, another midwife came who obviously is a bit more experienced and suggested that maybe trying a different position. So got onto her knees and leaning over the pool. But the first midwife still saying, right, you're going to have when the next contraction comes, you're going to have to really push. So she does, and she gives it all her welly and nothing happens. And so she said, right, I think we're going to have to get you out. We're going to need to transfer you to Southampton General Hospital. And the two midwives turn away. They turn away to get the trolley to bring it over. And they literally don't have to take more than 2 paces. So don't leave her for very long, and they're not very far away. But while they've turned their back and they're no longer got pressure on her, she's leaning on the side of the pool and she just goes, I'm worried about the baby, blah, 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 to her partner, her birth partner there. And she lets out this stream of consciousness and worry, and boom, there's the baby. Yeah. And it's just like, if only they'd left her alone. And as soon as she didn't have the pressure on her, and you see it with home births that don't seem to be going anywhere, and they, transfer happens, and I never know it's the large step into the ambulance, or whether it's the fact that when they are in the ambulance, they are no longer thinking about giving birth. They're just relaxing and waiting till they get, and then there's no pressure on them to be pushing or dilating or anything while they're in the ambulance. They don't have to be doing anything. And boom, by the time they arrive, they're pushing.
They're a lot closer, or they're already, they've already birthed on the way.
Yes, yeah.
That pressure is so powerful. And when you're feeling stared at, and we talk a lot about oxytocin and having to build the oxytocin, and with the oxytocin you have your endorphins, and we don't want adrenaline anywhere near. And when somebody's telling you to do something, well, that's switching on your neocortex, that's spiking your adrenaline, because you suddenly, I'm not doing it right. What if they need to tell me how to do this, a natural function of my body, which is, pushing can be very much like sneezing. And it's just something that your body will naturally do. But when somebody steps in and says, hold on a minute, you're not doing it right, hold it, push when I say push, and don't do, and it just stops people, doesn't it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And not 1 minute you're told don't push because it might be too early, and the next minute you're told to go with your body, and you're thinking, hang on a minute, do I go with my body, or but I was going with my body, and you were telling me that was wrong, so now I don't know what to do.
And all that oxytocin going, as this is all happening, and that's what you need.
Yeah.
It seems to be backwards.
Yes, but I don't know if you, for me, because I became a doula after I'd had 4 home births. My first was born in it was called a home from home room in hospital. So now we'd probably call it an alongside birth centre. And then the first time I supported friends and family at births, they were home births. The first couple of births I did as a doula were home births. So my first experience, it was a while before I had my first experience of a full hospital birth. The biggest shock to me was the amount of fear in the room, not the woman's fear. She didn't have fear. She was well supported. But the fear of the practitioners, the doctors and the midwives. I hope that the woman found more, having good birth partners can help protect you, and you've got your hormones can help you. But it seeps in, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. My first experience as a doula was in a hospital, and I remember thinking, this is not how it should be. And then after that, moving into more of the home birth doulaing, which is just, I love it. And then going into free birth doulaing as well, which is a whole different experience. It's really incredible how one thing that a healthcare practitioner can say can change the whole room. And once one health practitioner has a doubt or a niggle, and I think a lot of the time they see birth all the time. And I'm not sure how much debriefing they really get going from one birth to another. And so they hold on. We all hold on to things, but you see it quite a lot with healthcare professionals, especially midwives and doctors. And I think in a hospital setting, consultants are only there when there's a problem. So the minute they're called in, as far as they're concerned, there's a problem that needs to be fixed, and that's what they're there for. So there's no physiological birth going on there. There's no natural birth going to happen, because they're there because there's a problem, a perceived problem. But with the midwives, I think what you're saying is right. They can carry in a fear, and that can just change the whole experience for everyone.
Yeah, in fact, we just had a change of head of midwifery, but the previous head of midwifery has said to me on a number of times that my role, she said, is to protect my midwives. And some of these situations can result in difficult situations for them to recover from emotionally. And that's, that's very telling. But I think it does affect doctors as well. So one of the things, I do lots of work with women who've had a previous cesarean birth and are looking at what options, what to do next time, and they are meeting.
Right?
Pardon?
There are options. Just because you've had one cesarean doesn't mean that you have to have another.
No, and just because you've had 2 or 3 cesareans doesn't mean you have another. I mean, in this country, if you've had one cesarean, then it is likely that you won't meet any opposition in wanting a VBAC. You just have to be warned that just because a doctor may come across as being really supportive of VBAC, they're supportive of VBAC on their terms. Yeah. So they may be really supportive of VBAC until you get to 40 weeks or 41 weeks. They may be really supportive of VBAC, but as long as you are going to be continually stuck on a monitor, continual electronic fetal monitoring with the pads, that you're going to come in early, that you're going to not eat, and all these things. But you will still find that they have a tremendous amount of fear. So uterine rupture is a scary thing for an obstetrician to deal with, because you're dealing with both the life of the mother and the baby. Yeah. And catastrophic uterine rupture is even less likely than there's different types of rupture in terms of severity and how fast, etc. So that's really scary. So they want to manage that anxiety. They don't want to be in that position. They would like to have control over that situation. So they are thinking about it from that point of view. What would they do if it was them, their partner? They would want to have that control. And they don't consider anything else. And they're very comfortable doing cesareans. They're very comfortable doing continual electronic fetal monitoring. They are taught about intermittent monitoring with a handheld device, either a Doppler or a Pinard. I don't know if they're taught Pinard, but they're definitely taught how to do, they call it auscultation, don't they? Listening into the baby with a handheld device, but they don't do it very much. So they don't have a lot of confidence in it because it's not something they are familiar with. But at the same time, they are not in with the woman all the time. So they are not, for them to come in and see a nice long bit of paper. Now, midwives, as you know, they record. When they listen in, they record it on a document. But I think doctors trust the bit of paper more than they trust what the midwives have written. So when you are talking to these doctors who are, they're in it, they want to do good, they want to help people, but they're also human beings. So trying to see that and recognize that some of the stuff that they are saying is coming from that place of dealing with their own adrenaline and their own anxiety, their own experiences, and that that is then influencing them, and it's influencing the information that they give you. And one of the things I say to people is to try and turn it around, that they're not the person in charge, they're not the person that is able to agree or disagree to your birth choices. Think of yourself as the owner of a company, and that the obstetrician is somebody on your board of directors, and they're probably going to be like the health and safety or the accountant. They're going to be the cautious one. So you can talk to them and ask their opinion, and then decide whether, because it's your company, they can move to a different company, but it's your company, so you make the decision. And if you feel that they're not aligned to your company and what your company wants to be doing and going, you can sack them and get somebody else in. Yeah. And it's just that change of, it's not saying that you're not going to listen to them or take their information, but that there are other bits of information and other people and other points of view that are important.
Yeah, and we go back to the information. This is your birth, your body, your baby. You are in charge here. But when you don't have the information, it kind of spreads through everything, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
It's like a VE. You don't have to have a VE. What? Yeah. I don't have to do that.
Yeah, yeah. And even understanding, not only do you not have to have it, but there isn't any research to show that having routine vaginal examinations is of benefit. That a lot of hospitals have a policy of vaginal examinations every 4 hours, even though there's no research behind that. And there was an interesting article in their AIMS journal a few years back where Debbie Chippington-Derrick had been on the committee at NICE that was drawing up the guidelines for cesarean section, and they looked at, one of the things they looked at was how often should they be offering vaginal examinations, and they looked and found no research that routine vaginal examinations improve outcomes. The doctors refused, the doctors on the committee wanted every 2 hours and refused to sign off unless they had every 4 hours. So the NICE guidelines don't actually even say every 4 hours. They say no more frequently than every 4 hours. And it's understanding sort of the value of a vaginal examination. What information is it giving you? That it's not just about dilation. So sometimes a vaginal examination can be really useful to understand that the baby's quite high, that the baby's got his head to one side, but that routine vaginal examinations aren't of benefit. And then a lot of midwives don't realise that. There was the whole idea of, I get really worked out with this whole measuring birth by numbers. So how many centimeters dilated you are, how long your contractions are lasting, what's the gap in between them, and how long is your cervix, and actually a lot of this information isn't relevant if everything is, if stuff is progressing. There was an article in a magazine by a midwife who was visiting a country in Africa, and the women were labouring outside the clinic and then would be brought in when they were starting to push, and they weren't having any vaginal examinations. And the UK midwife was like, well, how do you know that they are fully dilated? How do you know? And the midwife said, well, we can see the head.
Exactly.
What are you going to do with the information? How useful? And it's taking the information. We talk about birth of what can be measured from the outside, not actually what's going on inside. So how many women have you spoken to who've been told you can't be ready to push because you were only 3 centimeters half an hour ago?
Yeah.
And so the information that comes from measuring is valued more than the information that the women are saying. And it's like women don't have any information to give at all. And we have information, and we need to value the information, women and birthing people. We need to value the information. We know how our body works. If we've given birth before, then we know what worked for us, what didn't work for us. And we also know what our baby is saying. It's amazing. Instincts are very powerful in birth, aren't they? We are mammals.
Absolutely.
And I've supported somebody who was so dead set on a home birth. She'd been in labour 3 hours and went, I need to go to hospital, something's not right. People who, one woman who started doing lunges, and baby hand wasn't moving down, and she just started doing lunges, just like 1 foot out the front and leaning forward into it. She said, I don't know why I'm doing these, but it feels good. And that's my mantra: do what feels good, because generally that's what you need to do. And it turned out when the baby came out, had a little, what they call a caput, a little swelling on their head. Baby's head had been wonky. Her doing lunges, and it's incredible how much information that we have. We have to value that, and we know that every time they do a report into stillbirth, one of the main things comes out is that the women were telling their health practitioners that something wasn't right, and they weren't listened to. And even with that, so it's taken on board, but now women are being told, right, every episode of low movement, you must come in. And it's all the wrong way around, because what's happening is women are going, I've got to be a good baby, my baby hasn't moved for whatever time. I'm not actually worried about it, but I've been told I must go in. So then they go in, baby's fine, they weren't worried anyway, because they knew it's just probably a change. And I'm not saying don't go in, but then they do that a couple of times because they're anxious and they want to be doing everything right, and then they find that they can't get into the birth centre and have their baby because they've got 2 episodes, or in some cases 1 episode of reduced movements. Now you're on the high risk pathway, and they were only doing what they thought they should do as good parents. They weren't doing it because they were worried about their baby's movements. And we've sort of turned it around. Do you understand what I'm trying? I don't know if I'm
absolutely. Women don't seem to be trusted to understand what's going on with their bodies, even though it's happening to them. So they didn't listen to her, and she is the birthing person. She can feel what's going on in her body.
Yes.
And that's not trusted by anyone except for the woman and perhaps her doula.
I was told with my first baby that I wasn't in labour because I wasn't falling apart enough.
Oh yes, I've heard that. Well, you're not making enough noise. so you can't possibly.
Yeah, and I don't. I don't know really. And hypnobirthing wasn't a thing then, but I was doing my breathing and my relaxation. I was on top of it. I was in control. Yeah.
I had an experience with a silent birther. So somebody who just would go inside, really insular and birth. And I remember the midwife standing there going, well, she can't be, this is just taking forever. She can't be anywhere near close. And I remember going, actually, she's in transition right now, because she looked up and she went, oh. And I went, oh, I think she's transitioning. And the midwife was like, no, that's not right. And then literally within 5 minutes, we were like, okay, baby's coming. Head.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's crazy.
But I've even been with, and I can share this story. I have permission to share this story because it's a cracker. I was with somebody and they decided to go to the birth centre. We got stuck in traffic. It was rush hour on a Monday morning, and she obviously was just cracking on really fast, and it's only a 10-minute drive, but it was taking us 20. But even then, her waters went in the car and she was starting to push, and I phoned. I was in the car, her partner was driving, and I phoned and said, she's gone, she's starting to push. And we were met in the car park with a wheelchair and a delivery pack all ready to go, and she couldn't sit on the chair because the baby was there. So her partner and I, like one arm, we almost carried her in. Unfortunately, we're into the straight room, and the bed was down low, and I said, oh, can we get the bed up, because she likes to lean forward. And the midwife said, oh, but I'd just like to examine her. I'd just like to pop on there because I'd like to examine her because I need to know that she's in labour. I was just like, yeah, what? And I just said, I can assure you she is in labour, leaned over, pushed the bed up myself. I'm thinking, I'm not having any of this nonsense. And she then, as soon as the bed was at the height that was comfortable for her, she leaned on it and went, oh. And the midwife was like, oh, I'll open my delivery pack then. And 5 minutes later, baby was there. And it's just like, it's all these rules. And because that was the policy was to somebody come in the birth centre to give them a vaginal examination, check they're in labour. And there's no room for individual differences.
No.
And women don't realise what these policies are. Birth plans. They're the birth plan that has been decided for you by a committee of midwives and doctors looking at population level data, research of varying levels of quality. And we know that obstetrician Dr. Amali Loka-Gamage looked and found that only 9 to 12% of recommendations from the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists relating to maternity, only 9 to 12% were based on top quality evidence. So some of these guidelines, these policies are based on not good evidence. Some of them are just based, and then even when there is recommendations, those can be overridden by the wishes of the people drawing up these guidelines. So it is worth knowing what those guidelines are. And this is why it's worth writing a birth plan. Because you need to decide which of those things, because there is already a birth plan. It's not, and I think it doesn't matter whether you call them birth preferences or birth plans, because it's the same thing, exactly the same thing. Just the words are different. So call it what you like. But know that there is a birth plan, and therefore find out. And if it's what you want to do, then you don't need to make a change, but you need to say where you want things to be different.
You need that information.
Yes.
And it's guidelines, which is a really important word, because it's not set in stone. It's not, you know, guidelines are guidelines. You're meant to be able to ebb and flow, but we do see a lot of hospitals say, right, well, that's the guideline and that's what we're going with. And like you say, there's no individualized care there. Not everybody fits into the pretty little box that's perfect.
No, and yet Better Births tells us that individualized care is safer. Yeah. And sometimes it's about who you talk to as well. So the midwife, your community midwife might not, although she actually should listen to you, and she should make individualized plans with you and give you individualized care. But sometimes they don't feel they have the power, and they feel that they are under pressure to get you to conform. And they can sometimes have censure, both overt and covert, whether in terms of bullying or actually being properly reprimanded. So it's worth going up. Don't always take just because your community midwife says no, go up. And just because your obstetrician says no, that doesn't mean to say that you can't. And I think this is, you know,
individualized with the care providers, isn't it? You can get one consultant who will say no to this, and then you say, well, I want to speak to somebody else, and they go, well, of course you can do that. And then like, oh my God.
Well, I have had 2 clients who had similar experiences with different doctors and midwives. Both of them had an appointment where there was a midwife and a doctor. And both times, the midwife and the doctor, when they were together, were sticking to the hospital line, saying it was both, they both wanted home births outside of guidelines. And both times they were saying, well, we will support you, but we recommend that you are. And both of them had the experience of being left in the room with the doctor who said, go for your home birth, it'll be great. And then later being left with the midwife, or walking out with the midwife who said, go ahead with your home birth, it'd be great. And it's like they both wanted to say, go ahead with your home birth, it'd be great. But they felt constrained to be seen to be doing the hospital policy. And it's
kind of crazy, right?
It's crazy because, and that's where litigation things. But I'm talking about policies. One of the big, you know, going back to the women who've had a previous cesarean. I support a lot of people who have had a previous cesarean and looking to plan a VBAC. I do VBAC workshops, and I've got a HBAC free.
A vaginal birth after cesarean.
Yes.
And you also support a lot of HBACs.
Yes.
So a
home birth after cesarean birth. Yes. And one of the things that a lot of women, I mean, there's such a huge variety, not all VBAC women going for VBAC. We're all going to make different decisions based on the same information, because otherwise we'd all be driving the same car, you know. We all, but a lot of the women who've had a previous cesarean want to give if they're planning a VBAC, they want to give it their best chance of it ending up as a VBAC. I don't like using words such as achieved or successful VBAC, because that sounds like it's a test or something, and it's not. You can do everything you possibly can and still end up with another cesarean birth. That's the way it goes sometimes, and so it's not there's no judgment, but a lot of and it makes sense to, if you're planning a VBAC, for it to have the biggest, do what you can to make it end up as a VBAC. And research, there is good quality research that says that gives the best outcomes for babies. But yet, if you look what the hospital policy is, the standard care for somebody having a VBAC in hospital, or having a VBAC, is everything that would increase the chance of ending up with a cesarean. So going into hospital early, that increases your chance of having a cesarean. Good quality research to that one. Good quality research to say that being stuck on a continual monitor, the pads, increases your chance of ending up with a cesarean. not eating and drinking in labour increase your chance of ending up with a cesarean. Being on time, having strict time limits over first stage of labour, second stage of labour. These are all things that increase your chance of ending up in cesarean, and so therefore reduce your chance of having the VBAC,
that
which
rolling
is
ball of interventions, isn't it?
Yeah, and these are because a lot of the time medical care seems to sort of distill issues down to one issue. So with VBAC, the only thing they're thinking about is watching for a uterine rupture and being able to deal with it. And giving birth on a consultant-led unit also increases your chance of ending up as a cesarean. So, and that's standard policy. Now, it's good quality research to say it increase your chance of having a cesarean. Really, really low quality, no evidence to say that it would improve outcomes for babies. And in fact, so there has been research out very recently which backs up previous research from the birthplace study showing that planning a home birth after a previous cesarean birth increases your chance quite dramatically of having that for the birth ending up as a vaginal birth, and doesn't increase the chance of your baby having problems and needing special care.
Isn't that the HBAC versus the VBAC and the outcomes?
But we see that across the board. We see it, but yeah, we see it across the board. And a lot of women who've had various reasons people have had a cesarean, and sometimes people haven't laboured at all. They've had elective cesareans first time round, baby was breech, whatever. But a lot of people who have laboured before, when they talk about their previous birth and they had a cesarean but labour stalled and they didn't dilate and they didn't push, and then they tell you how many times they have vaginal examinations, how many people came into the room, how many times they were told they were worried about their baby's heart rate, how many times they were told hours and you need to be doing this by then, and it's no wonder that actually their body shut down. They couldn't do it because they weren't given the environment. Back to that woman doing this, who couldn't, whose baby didn't come out because her body, even when our cerebral cortex thinks we're safe, we don't give birth with our cerebral cortex, we give birth with our reptilian brain down here, and so that bit needs to feel safe. And that bit can be triggered by all the things we said, the sights, the sounds, and if the cortisol is flowing here, then birth's not going to happen and flow as easily.
I was one of those. With my first birth, I laboured for 4 days and I didn't have the information, and I was put on my back. I had a back-to-back baby. I was put on my back and I was given exams, and I didn't know I had a choice. And it was a rolling ball of interventions. I was given this, I was given that. I was told to do this, told to that. Never was I told to move. Never was I told I was allowed to move. Once being on a monitor, nobody said, you can get up and walk around if you want to. No. They just said, there you go, stay there. So I thought, I have to stay here then. It's that rolling ball of interventions, and when there's no information, or the selection of information that's being offered to you is so small, how can we make a truly informed decision on this process when we don't know?
Yeah. And myself, possibly you, so many of us, we go into childbirth assuming, I remember just thinking, well, they'll do everything, the midwives and doctors will do everything they can to help me have a straightforward birth. And actually they did everything they could to derail my straightforward birth. And that's when you can almost feel like you're in a twilight world. Because whether or not you went to classes, your body's telling you to do things. How many women say, it felt wrong to be on the bed, I just wanted to move, or this is like the worst position to be pushing in, and they kept talking, I wanted them to be quiet, the light was too bright, I just wanted to go, the toilet was so comfortable. This is something I haven't even heard midwives saying, that actually there is this imperative in us that's telling us, I need to do this, and I don't feel, I need to get, and that's why we want to go into hospital. If we're planning a hospital birth, we want to go into hospital early, because we want to get to where we're going to give birth. There's that drive to get there, and then we want to be able to be moved and to feel safe. And yet you're in this twilight world where what your imperative, your body's telling you to move, to turn, to rock, to sway, to get up. You can see in birth programs, you can see the women, they're like lifting their bottoms up, and you can see their instincts are telling them to do something. And yet all around you there are people with the bright lights that are telling you, no, you're not dilated, no, you've got to sit still, or no, you've got to, well, the monitor, we keep losing, and they get cross with you and annoyed with you. We've lost the contact with the baby because you keep moving. You need to stay still. And
it's like, oh my gosh. I remember being told, so my baby was back to back, my first was back to back, and I remember there was a point where I felt the need to push, and I kept like, I feel like I need to push here, like I need to, and they go, well, you're like 3 centimeters forward, don't push. And in hindsight, I wonder if I had pushed, if that pushing was me helping my baby turn. And because I didn't push, and then I was sat on my back, did that inhibit that birth? And from anecdotal evidence now that I've seen with other people and clients, that being told not to do what my body needed to do in them moments, not having the information and understanding that, impacted that birth.
And so then we go from somebody who has their birth impacted, who then finds themselves in the stranded beetle position with their legs akimbo, with the whole world looking at their bottom, being told to keep their bottom on the floor when actually everything is telling them to tip their pelvis forward, who are being told that everything they know about what's going on inside their body is wrong, who are being told that there's something, their baby's life is at danger. So now they're naked, they are living in a twilight world where everything they think should be happening isn't happening. They're that they are they're fearful of the baby's life, and this is where birth trauma is, that actually now they have no control, nobody's talking to them, they are completely vulnerable and fearful. And then they have we damage their perineums, we give them the episiotomies that tear, we have the forceps, or they have the cesarean, and we say, thank goodness you're in hospital, we have saved your baby, you have a healthy baby. And this woman is now looking at this baby going, I am covered, I don't know what's happened. I thought everything would happen to help me have a straightforward birth, and now here I am, and I've been through this traumatic event, I'm now meant to look after this baby, and I'm shaky, I feel violated, and we wonder, and then milk won't come in because of the knock-on consequences of that, all of that. They then can't sleep, and they're being asked to measure everything except how much sleep they've had. They are told, that I've been with women in postnatal wards, and you know, when did you last feed the baby? How much do they feed? We, the hospital, need to see that your baby has had a good feed, that you are therefore an adequate mother to take your baby home. That, oh, you can't go home because you haven't done a poo. Well, I haven't eaten or slept in 2 days. And, you know, I know that when I get home in my own environment, just like going on holiday, you know, you go on holiday, within half an hour of coming home, everybody's done a poo. And it's the same. You much like to do a poo at home, but they want to make sure, you know, and it's just, and so then we're the baby, what they mean by healthy babies, the baby's alive. And that's really the very bottom line. We should be aiming much higher than that. And because that baby is not healthy if the mother's not healthy.
Yeah.
If the mother is dealing with trauma, physical and emotional, it's much harder for her to care for that baby. If she hasn't had the hormones at birth, it's much harder for her to have that bond. And then women feel guilty that they didn't love their babies instantly. And they can carry that around for decades, all their lives, thinking there was something wrong with them, that they didn't have that rush of love for their babies. And actually it was because how the birth was managed. And so then you know, and then they've been told they've done everything wrong. They did the birth wrong. They fed their baby wrong. They, you know, everything. They risked their baby's life with the giving birth. So next time I'll just go for a cesarean, or next time, you know, you're risking a baby's life trying to breastfeed, or next time I'm just going to formula feed. You know, it's a snowball, isn't it?
It's almost so, I don't like to use the word normal, but it's normal that's the process of birth now. That's what people expect. And I hate the saying, leave your dignity at the front door when you go into hospital, because da-da-da-da-da. And I'm very much against that. No. You should keep your dignity the whole way through. And if you have good healthcare providers, and if you're well supported, then you will have your dignity all the way through. And that's important. Very, very important. But I think all of these processes impact parenting.
Yes.
You do a lot of feeding advice and moving on to solid foods and things like this. Do you see anything with the moms that you support where the more traumatic the birth, almost the less confident they are in themselves moving forward?
Yeah. And actually I see it. I definitely see it. I don't do as much breastfeeding support as I used to do, but I do, and I think I see it on the retreat days I run, and you're working with women dealing with their sense of self and their sense of self as a mother. But I think I do starting solids and moving on to starting solids, and I think I have the same approach. It's all about sharing the information and helping people decide. And sometimes it's the first time that anybody has said to them, this is your baby. Here is the information. You know your baby. We've still got this thing, we still hear health professionals saying it's 6 months full stop, and women getting baby solid food a week before they're 6 months, or not giving any till they're a week after, even though they're not showing any signs. And we come back, it's a bit like the due dates that everybody should stick to. You know, your baby will be born on the that there's a huge developmental difference. We don't expect all babies to walk at the same time. We know that all babies roll at different times. So they are going to be ready for solid food at different times. And the guidelines don't say at 6 months. The guidelines say around about 6 months. not before 4 months. Follow your baby and look for the signs that they're ready. And by the signs of readiness, they are the signs that physical changes have taken place inside their body. So there's lots of myths around the signs as well. People talk about, oh, grabbing food off the plate. Well, that's not a sign. It's not a, they grab your hairbrush, they grab your remote control, they grab your phone, they, you know, you've got it, they want it. Babies don't know that food tastes nice, and they don't know that it's going to stop them being hungry. They are just learning. And so grabbing food off your plate is a good that they're getting sign they're getting towards that, but there's not the physical changes that have happened. The physical changes are that they can sit up, so they're back straight, that they might topple over if they go and reach something, but if you sat them down, that they are able to look at something, pick it up and put it straight to their mouth. So not put it and then go, where is it, you know, and then it gradually, you know, accidentally ends up in the mouth. It's an accuracy thing, eye hand coordination, and it's that they lose the tongue thrust reflex, and that could, the NHS has moved to talk about that they can move the food around and then swallow it, and that can be a bit confusing for parents, I think, because sometimes it's just reduced down to that they can swallow, and babies have been swallowing milk. So I explain it that it's like when you try and put Calpol in your baby's mouth, and you know how hard that is, and they push it out with their tongue, you can't even get the syringe in, because the tongue thrust reflex is a protective mechanism that stops babies choking, and they lose it around about 5 months, but it's, you know, sometimes it's nearer 6 or later. When those 3 things happen, that's the point at which babies, if in the wild, as it were, would see an insect or a berry on the floor, pick it up, put it in their mouth. And when they can, so you can let your baby explore and play with food, just as long as it's soft, but it's when they can, because if they pick it up and they won't get it in their mouth, yeah, they might just mush it on their face. If they did accidentally get it in their mouth, or did get it in their mouth on purpose, if they still got the tongue thrust reflex, they'll move it around for a bit and then they'll push it out. Right. If they can pick it up themselves, put it into their mouth, move it around and swallow it, then they're ready.
Makes sense.
So looking for that seems much more clearer than doing, again, by numbers or times. And yeah, I've been doing workshops that have been, I started doing them, I used to manage a Short Start Children's Centre, and the information that parents were getting from health visitors was only about baby-led weaning at 6 months. Parents wanted more, they want to explore, they want to understand why were these things suggested, because when you understand why, then that helps you.
Knowledge, isn't it? Having that knowledge base.
Yes, yes. And you know, giving them the confidence that they can trust their baby, trust themselves to know their baby, and that there's so many silly stuff around that, you know, give your children, because, well, yes, give your children green vegetables first, so they don't get a sweet tooth. I say, have you ever tasted breast milk? It's the sweetest thing you've ever come across. So babies have a sweet tooth. Yeah. But actually what you can do, particularly if you're waiting and you can do finger foods and baby-led weaning, you're not just giving them one food, you're giving them a variety. That's normal eating.
Yeah.
And one of the things that happened so the World Health Organization hasn't changed its recommendations for starting solid food ages since 1994. So back then they said not before 4 months, around 6 months. But the UK, then we were doing 3 months. And so I don't know who decided that they said we'll do it at 4 months. So we were all told at 4 months, and then later on the evidence was even stronger to wait till 6 months. So it's the UK changed what they were saying. But what happened was, what you do with when you're introducing solid food to a 4-month-old, one food at a time, and wait a few days, start with soft food, start with purees, that just got lifted up and put to 6 months. The same way to do it, but just do it at 6 months when the babies are different. So you can just start with spaghetti bolognese, you don't have to do. And the whole baby rice, that's fascinating. So the baby rice thing comes from when babies originally weren't given any solid food till they were at least 1, more like 18 months. They were just breastfed, and that's where we get weaning comes from, because it was a time when you weaned off breast onto solid food. But the Industrial Revolution meant that some babies were weaned earlier because of women working in the factories, and so they would be given what was called PAP or SOPs, and that was those babies didn't do very well. They had quite a high mortality rate, unfortunately. But it was decided that as the SOPs were replacing milk, they had to have 2 criteria. It had to be white, because milk was white, and it had to be bland, because they thought that breast milk was bland. And so that's where baby rice comes from. It's white and it's bland.
I don't believe that back then tasted breast milk.
Yeah, but this is because it was the men were starting to take over and tell women how to bring up babies. You see, this is all from then. I was listening to Dr. Helen Ball from the sleep, and she was talking from the Durham University sleep clinic, and she was talking about how it was the men in the late 19th century and into the 20th century that started taking over the responsibility for how babies should be brought up and making it more mechanical and scientific, and less of this shilly-shally female thinking, and the same happened with weaning and starting solids, and it is taking us, the same happened with carrying our babies, the same happened with birth, and it is taken us over 100 years back, to actually that we have the knowledge, and we just need to be sharing this knowledge so that we can all,
there's a lot
a lot of unlearning.
I remember my mom and my nan said to me when my eldest was about 4 months, "Are you feeding him baby rice? Just put it in the bottle with milk." Because then he'll sleep. And it's it's still so prevalent. So yes, having these conversations and people like yourself sharing this amazing knowledge is so important right now. It really is.
Yeah, and we are seeing a change, I think. Well, seeing a change in good and for bad, aren't we?
Slowly, we're getting there. It's slowly going.
Yeah, I think I was lucky. I came from a long line of strong matriarchal women, and who passed on a lot of stuff to me that I am now passing on. So yes,
thank you so much for joining us and giving us all this information.
Thank you.
So important.
Thank you for having me. We've covered quite a range of different topics, haven't we?
We have. Now I have to think of a name for this episode. But it's been fabulous talking to you, and I'd love to speak to you again sometime. I'm sure there's lots of conversations that we can have.
Thank you very much, Carly.